The morning rain drummed against the kitchen window of the two-story colonial house in suburban Denver, Colorado, as Linda Martinez carefully folded her late husband's clothes into cardboard boxes. At 62, her hands still moved with the precision of someone who had spent decades organizing a household, but now they trembled slightly, not from age, but from the weight of starting over. "Mom, are you seriously going to take all day with this?" Michael's voice cut through the silence. Like a blade, her 34-year-old son stood in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled from another late night at the office, his eyes holding the same impatience that had become his trademark since his father's funeral 6 months ago. "I'm almost finished." "Sweetheart," Linda replied softly, not looking up from Robert's favorite sweater, the navy blue one he'd worn to every family barbecue for 15 years. The fabric still held traces of his cologne, and she fought the urge to press it against her cheek. "Well, hurry up. Jennifer's coming over later to discuss the renovations for your room, and she doesn't want to see all this ... stuff everywhere." Michael's wife had made it clear from day one that Linda's presence in their home was temporary at best, unwelcome at worst. Linda's heart sank a little deeper. Her room was actually Michael's old bedroom from high school, complete with faded posters of basketball players and a twin bed that made her back ache every morning. She'd offered to help with rent, to contribute to groceries, to do anything to make her stay less burdensome. But Michael had waved her off with the same dismissive gesture he'd used as a teenager. "I understand," she said, folding the sweater. "With extra care, I'll have everything cleared out by lunch." "Good. And Mom?" Michael paused at the doorway, his tones softening just enough to give her hope. "Thanks for, helping out with the kids yesterday. Megan really enjoyed having you pick her up from school." Linda's face lit up at the mention of her granddaughter. "She's such a bright girl, Michael. Did you know she's reading at a 5th grade level, and her artwork?" "Yeah, great. Listen, I've got to run. Conference call with the Peterson account." He was already halfway down the hall, his footsteps echoing through the house that had once felt like home, but now felt more like a hotel, where she'd overstayed her welcome. Linda finished packing the last box and carried it to the garage, where she'd been storing Robert's belongings. The space smelled of motor oil and sawdust, familiar scents that reminded her of Saturday mornings when Robert would tinker with his tools while she gardened. Now, the garage felt like a mausoleum of their shared life boxes stacked against walls, furniture covered in dust sheets, and in the corner, a mysterious tarp covering something Robert had insisted on keeping but never explained. She'd asked Michael about it once. Shortly after moving in, he'd shrugged and said it was probably just more of Dad's junk that needed to be thrown out. But something about the way Robert had looked at that covered shape during their last visit to the storage unit made her curious. He'd had a secretive smile, the kind he wore when he was planning a surprise for her birthday. The front door slammed, and Linda knew Michael had left for work. She made her way to the kitchen, where Jennifer was already setting up fabric samples on the granite countertop, fabric samples that would transform Linda's temporary bedroom into something more suitable for Jennifer's vision of the perfect home. "Oh, Linda, good morning," Jennifer said without looking up from her color swatches. At 32, Jennifer had the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive salons and personal trainers. She'd married Michael 5 years ago, and Linda had genuinely tried to build a relationship with her daughter-in-law. But Jennifer seemed to view Linda as an obstacle to her domestic ambitions. "Good morning, dear. That's a lovely shade of blue you've chosen. It's cerulean, actually. Very trendy right now." Jennifer held up a fabric sample against the light. "I'm thinking of turning your room into a home office. Michael needs a quiet space to work, and with the way his career is going, we really need to optimize every square foot of this house." Linda felt her stomach tighten. "I see. And where would I?" "Oh, don't worry about that. I'm sure we'll figure something out. Maybe the basement? It's not finished, but it's dry, and we could put in a small bed and a space heater." The basement? Linda had seen at once concrete floors, exposed pipes, and a dampness that made her arthritis flare up, just thinking about it. She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "Actually," Jennifer continued, warming to her subject, "I've been thinking that maybe it's time for you to consider other options. Senior living communities are so much nicer these days. They have activities and people your own age, and you wouldn't have to worry about being a burden on family." The word burden hit Linda like a physical blow. She'd raised Michael, supported him through college, cheered at every baseball game, helped him through his divorce from his first wife, and celebrated when he'd found love again with Jennifer. Now she was a burden. "I understand your concerns," Linda said carefully. "But Michael asked me to stay while I figured out my next steps. Robert's estate is still being settled, and right about that." Jennifer's voice took on a sharper edge. "How long exactly does it take to settle an estate? I mean, it's been 6 months. Surely there can't be that much to sort through." "Linda, Thought about the mysterious storage unit Robert had rented, the one filled with boxes she hadn't had the courage to open yet. The lawyer had given her the key along with a letter Robert had written before his death, a letter she'd been heartbroken to read. These things take time, Linda said softly. Well, maybe it's time to speed things up. Michael's been very patient, but his stress levels are through the roof. His blood pressure medication had to be increased last month, and I'm worried about his health. The implication was clear. Linda's presence was literally making her son sick. She excused herself and retreated to the small bedroom that was no longer hers, closing the door and leaning against it as tears finally came. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jennifer on the phone with someone, probably her mother, complaining about the awkward situation with Michael's mother. Linda had become the awkward situation, the problem to be solved, the inconvenience to be managed. She pulled out her phone and called her sister Margaret in Phoenix, the only family she had left besides Michael. Linda, honey, how are you holding up? I'm fine, Linda lied, the words automatic after months of practice. Just calling to check in? You don't sound fine. What's wrong? Linda found herself telling Margaret about the home office conversation, about Jennifer's suggestion of senior living, about feeling like a stranger in her own son's house. Margaret listened without interruption, her silence speaking volumes. Pack your bags, Margaret said finally. Come stay with me. Tom and I have plenty of room, and you know how much he loves having you visit. I can't just abandon Michael. He's dead. All I have left of Robert, sweetheart. Sometimes the people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do is remove ourselves from situations where we're not wanted. Linda looked around the bedroom with its faded sports posters and single bed, at the boxes of Robert's clothes waiting to be donated, at the life she'd tried so hard to rebuild in the shadow of her son's reluctant charity. Let me think about it, she said. Don't think too long, honey. Life's too short to spend it walking on eggshells in your own family. That evening, Michael came home in a foul mood. The Peterson account had fallen through, and he'd spent the day in damage control meetings. Linda had prepared his favorite meal, pot roast with vegetables, hoping to lift his spirits and maybe find a moment to talk about their living situation. Smells good in here, he said, loosening his tie as he entered the kitchen. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to run to her for comfort after a bad day at school. Sit down, sweetheart. Dinner's almost ready. They ate in relative peace, with Michael sharing stories about his coworkers and Linda listening with the practiced attention of a mother who'd learned to find joy in her child's smallest victories. It was during dessert Robert's favorite apple pie that Jennifer dropped her bombshell. Michael, I forgot to mention. My sister called today. She and her family are coming for Thanksgiving next week, and they're planning to stay for the whole weekend. Michael's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That's great, honey. It'll be nice to have everyone together. The only thing is, with Linda's room being converted to your office, we don't really have anywhere for them to sleep. I was thinking maybe Linda could stay in the garage for the weekend. Just temporarily, of course. We could set up a cot and some blankets, and it would give us the space we need for family. Linda felt the blood drain from her face. The garage? Jennifer was suggesting she'd sleep in the garage like a piece of unwanted furniture. I don't know, Jen. That seems a bit extreme. Linda found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. I was going to say inconvenient, Michael said, but his tone suggested he was already considering the possibility. But you know what, Mom? It's just for a weekend, and the garage is heated. You could think of it as camping. Camping. Linda stared at her son, searching his face for any sign of the boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when she dropped him off for his first day of school, who'd called her his best friend until he was 12. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who could rationalize asking his mother to sleep in a garage. Of course, Linda said, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions swirling inside her. Whatever you think is best. Michael looked relieved. Great. And Mom, thanks for being so understanding. I know this situation isn't ideal for anyone, but we're all just trying to make the best of it. Linda nodded and began clearing the dishes, her hands moving automatically while her mind raced. She thought about Margaret's offer, about the storage unit she'd been avoiding, about the letter from Robert she'd been too afraid to read. Maybe it was time to stop making the best of things and start making some decisions of her own. That night, she lay in the twin bed that had never felt like home, listening to the sounds of Michael and Jennifer's life through the thin walls there. Laughter, their quiet conversations, their plans for a future that clearly didn't include her. She thought about Robert, about the life they'd built together, about the dreams they'd shared for their golden years. None of those dreams had included sleeping in garages or being treated like an unwelcome guest by the child she'd devoted her life to raising. The next morning, Linda made a decision. She dressed carefully in her best clothes, the navy blue dress. Robert had always loved and drove to the storage facility across town. It was time to face whatever Robert had left behind. Time to read the letter she'd been carrying in her purse. For 6 months, time to stop running from the past and start planning for the future. The storage unit was exactly as Robert had left it organized, and labeled with his characteristic precision. But it was the corner where the mysterious tarp had been that drew her attention. In its place was a small table with an envelope marked for Linda. "When you're ready?" Her hands shook as she opened the letter, Robert's familiar handwriting blurring. Through her tears, "My dearest Linda," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost and alone. I know our son loves you, but I also know that love sometimes gets complicated by life's pressures and other people's expectations. I've left you something that I hope will give you options, independence, and maybe a little adventure in whatever years you have left. ... Linda's breath caught as she read the next lines, her eyes widening in disbelief. The letter trembled in Linda's hands as she read Robert's words again. Certain she must have misunderstood, but there it was, written in his careful script. Behind the false wall at the back of the storage unit, you'll find the 1967 Shelby Cobra 427 that my father left me. I've been restoring it for 20 years, and it's finally finished. The paperwork is in the folder marked Cobra Title Insurance, and the appraisal I had done last month. Linda, that car is worth $2.3 million. Linda's legs gave out, and she sank into the folding chair Robert had kept in the unit for his weekend restoration sessions. $2.3 million. She read the number again, trying to make sense of it. Robert had been a careful man with their finances, but they'd lived modestly saving for retirement, putting Michael through college, maintaining their small house in the suburbs. He'd never mentioned anything about a multi-million-dollar car. No, you're probably shocked, the letter continued, and maybe a little angry that I kept this secret. But I wanted to surprise you when I finished the restoration. I'd planned to unveil it on our 40th anniversary next year. The truth is, my father bought this car as a wreck in 1968, thinking he'd fix it up someday. He never did, and it sat in his garage for decades. When he died, I inherited it along with his tools and his unfulfilled dreams. I've been working on it in secret every Saturday for the past 20 years. Using the money from my consulting work to buy parts and pay for the professional work I couldn't do myself. Linda wiped her eyes and looked around the storage unit with new understanding. The pegboard full of specialized tools, the parts catalogs, the careful notes in Robert's handwriting, it had all been for this mysterious project, she'd thought. He was just tinkering with household repairs, but he'd been crafting something extraordinary. The car is more than just an investment, Linda. It's a piece of American automotive history, and it's beautiful. I've included photos in the folder, but nothing compares to seeing it in person. The paint is Guardsman blue with white racing stripes, just like the original Shelby team cars. The engine is a 427 cubic inch V8 that sounds like thunder when it starts. I've driven it exactly 12 miles, all within this facility, and it's the most incredible machine I've ever experienced. Linda's hands shook as she opened the folder marked Cobra. Inside were photographs that took her breath away. The car was indeed beautiful, sleek, powerful, and impossibly elegant. Its curves seemed to capture motion even while standing still, and the blue paint gleamed like liquid sapphire under the storage unit's fluorescent lights, but it was the appraisal document that made her heart race. The letterhead read, Barrett Jackson, Collector Car Auctions, and the signature belonged to one of the most respected names in the classic car world. The assessment was detailed and thorough, noting the car's provenance, its numbers, engine, and the quality of the restoration. The final valuation was conservative, the appraiser noted, given the car's exceptional condition and documented history. Linda, the letter continued, I'm giving you this car not just as an inheritance, but as a choice. You can sell it and live comfortably for the rest of your life, or you can keep it and experience the joy I felt every time I worked on it. But more importantly, I'm giving you independence. You'll never have to depend on anyone else's charity or kindness. You'll never have to accept less than you deserve. The words hit her like a revelation. Robert had seen what she was only beginning to understand, that her relationship with Michael had shifted from love to obligation, from family to burden. He'd prepared for this moment, giving her the tools to reclaim her dignity and her future. The false wall is behind the covered workbench. Push on the upper left corner, and it will swing open. Be careful, the car is parked on a lift to protect the undercarriage. The key is in the ignition, just like always. I hope you'll start it at least once and hear the engine I worked so hard to perfect. It's the sound of freedom, Linda. It's the sound of possibilities. Linda folded the letter carefully and walked to the back of the storage unit. The workbench looked ordinary, but when she pressed on the upper left corner as Robert had instructed, a section of the wall swung inward. On hidden hinges, behind it was a space she'd never imagined, a pristine garage within a garage, complete with professional lighting and a hydraulic lift. And on that lift, gleaming under the spotlights like a sleeping dragon, was the most beautiful car she'd ever seen. The Shelby Cobra 427 was even more stunning in person than in the photographs. Its proportions were perfect: long hood, short deck, and muscular curves that suggested barely contained power. The blue paint seemed to have depth, as if she could dive into its surface and swim through layers of color. The white racing stripes ran from nose to tail, perfectly straight and precisely painted. Chrome bumpers caught the light like jewelry, and the side exhaust pipes hinted at the mechanical symphony waiting to be unleashed. Linda climbed the stairs to the lift platform and walked slowly around the car, running her fingers along its flawless surface. Every detail was perfect, from the chrome wire wheels to the leather interior visible through the windows. Robert had spent 20 years creating this masterpiece, and now it was hers. She found the key in the ignition just as he'd promised. The interior was pristine black leather seats with white stitching, a wood-rimmed steering wheel, and gauges that looked like precision instruments. She slid behind the wheel, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The key turned icily, and the engine roared to life with a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. It wasn't just noise, it was music, a deep, throaty symphony of mechanical precision and raw power. Linda felt the vibration through the steering wheel, through the seat, through her entire body. This was what Robert had meant about the sound of freedom. She sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes, just listening to the engine and feeling the car's presence around her. This wasn't just a vehicle, it was a statement. A declaration of independence, a middle finger to anyone who thought she was too old, too weak, or too broken to matter. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mom, don't forget to move your stuff to the garage tonight. Jennifer's sister arrives tomorrow." Linda stared at the message, then at the car surrounding her, then back at the message. The contrast was stark. In one world, she was being asked to sleep in a garage like an unwanted piece of furniture. In another world, she was sitting in a garage behind the wheel of a car worth more than most people's houses. She turned off the engine and climbed out of the car, but her mind was racing faster than the Cobra's 427 engine. Robert's letter had mentioned that the car was insured and legal to drive. The title was clear and the registration was current. Theoretically, she could drive it right off the lot. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Linda had been driving for 45 years, but she'd never driven anything more powerful than Robert's pickup truck. The Cobra was a different beast entirely, a race car disguised as a street car, with enough power to launch her into the next county if she wasn't careful. But wasn't that exactly what she needed? Not the power to launch into the next county, but the power to launch into the next chapter of her life? She spent the rest of the afternoon reading through Robert's restoration notes, learning about the car's history and capabilities. The Shelby Cobra 427 was legendary. Only 348 had been built in 1967, making it one of the rarest and most valuable American sports cars ever produced. Robert's car was number 247, and according to the documentation, it had been owned by a racing driver. Before being sold to Robert's father, the restoration had been meticulous. Robert had documented every step with photographs and detailed notes. He'd rebuilt the engine to original specifications, restored the bodywork to factory standards, and even had the interior reupholstered with period-correct materials. The car was more than a restoration, it was a resurrection. As the sun began to set, Linda made her decision. She wouldn't drive the car home tonight. She wasn't ready for that level of drama, but she would drive it somewhere. She needed to feel what Robert had felt, to understand what he'd been trying to give her. She lowered the lift and opened the storage unit's large door. The Cobra fit through with inches to spare, and Linda found herself behind the wheel of a legend, idling in a storage facility parking lot in suburban Denver. Her hands were shaking, her heart was pounding, and she felt more alive than she had in months. The car handled like a dream, even at parking lot speeds. The steering was precise, the clutch was smooth, and the engine responded to her every input. With eager enthusiasm, she drove slowly through the empty lot, getting a feel for the car's dimensions and behavior. It was wider than she was used to, lower to the ground, and infinitely more responsive than anything she'd ever driven. After 30 minutes of cautious exploration, Linda parked the car back in its hiding place and secured the storage unit. But something had changed in those 30 minutes. She'd tasted freedom, and it was intoxicating that evening. She moved her belongings to the garage as requested, setting up a cot between Michael's old mountain bike and Jennifer's exercise equipment. The space was cold, despite the heating. Michael had mentioned, and the concrete floor made every sound echo. But Linda barely noticed the discomfort. Her mind was elsewhere, planning and scheming and dreaming. She pulled out her laptop and began researching Shelby Cobras, collector car auctions, and automotive journalism. What she found surprised her. The classic car world was vibrant and active, with shows, races, and gatherings happening every weekend. There were magazines, websites, and forums dedicated to Shelby Cobras, specifically, with owners sharing stories and photos of their prized possessions. One article particularly caught her attention. It was about a widow in California who had inherited her husband's restored Mustang and decided to drive it across the country to honor his memory. The story had gone viral, and she'd been featured on morning talk shows and in national magazines. The woman had used her 15 minutes of fame to promote automotive restoration education and had eventually started a nonprofit foundation. Linda stared at the article, a plan forming in her mind. She thought about the Cobra sitting in its secret garage, about the story behind its restoration, about the legacy Robert had left her. She thought about Michael sleeping comfortably in his bed while she shivered on a cot in his garage. She thought about Jennifer's plans to convert her room into an office, about the suggestion that she move to a senior living facility. Most of all, she thought about what Robert had written in his letter. It's the sound of freedom. Linda, it's the sound of possibilities. By the time she finally fell asleep on the uncomfortable cot, Linda had made her decision. Tomorrow, she would pack her things and leave. But she wouldn't be going to Margaret's house in Phoenix, and she wouldn't be checking into a senior living facility. She would be starting an adventure that would show her son and the whole world exactly what he was losing. Linda woke at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of Jennifer's alarm clock through the thin garage wall. Her back ached from the cot, and her breath formed small clouds in the cold air. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of her son's household waking up, shower running, coffee brewing, the muffled voices of morning routine. Once, she'd been part of that routine. Now, she was literally on the outside looking in. She dressed quietly in her warmest clothes and began packing her belongings. Everything she owned fit into 3 suitcases and 2 boxes, a lifetime reduced to what could be carried in a single trip. The reduction felt both tragic and liberating. She'd been carrying too much for too long. By 7 o'clock, she heard Michael's car pull out of the driveway. He hadn't come to check on her, hadn't asked how she'd slept, hadn't even acknowledged that his 62-year-old mother had spent the night in an unheated garage. The omission spoke louder than any argument could have. Linda loaded her belongings into her old Honda Civic and drove to the storage facility. Her hands were steady on the wheel, her mind clear and focused. She'd spent 40 years being the accommodating wife, the supportive mother, the woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. Today, that woman was retiring. The Cobra started. With its characteristic roar, and Linda felt her pulse quicken, she'd spent the early morning hours watching YouTube videos about driving high-performance cars, reading articles about automotive journalism, and researching the collector car circuit. What she'd learned was that the classic car world was full of stories about restoration, about legacy, about the connections between past and present. She had a story to tell, and she finally had the vehicle to tell it. But first, she had practicalities to address. She drove the Honda to a nearby hotel and checked in for 3 nights, giving herself time to plan and prepare. Then she called her sister Margaret. Linda, it's 7 in the morning. Is everything okay? I'm fine, Maggie. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to let you know I'm leaving Michael's house. Oh, honey, I'm so glad. When should Tom and I expect you? That's the thing, I'm not coming to Phoenix. At least, not immediately. I need to tell you something about Robert's estate. Something I just discovered. Linda spent the next hour explaining about the Cobra, the secret restoration, and the letter Robert had left for her. Margaret listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions that revealed her amazement. $2.3 million. Linda, are you sure? That seems impossible. I have the appraisal right here. It's real. Maggie, Robert left me something incredible. So what are you going to do? Sell it? Linda was quiet for a moment, watching the Cobra through the hotel window. Even parked in an ordinary hotel lot, it looked extraordinary, a masterpiece of automotive art that drew stares from every passerby. I'm going to drive it, she said finally. I'm going to drive it, and I'm going to tell people about Robert's story, and I'm going to see what happens. Linda, you're talking about a race car. You've never driven anything like that. I drove it yesterday, and I'm still here. Besides, it's not about the car, it's about the choice. For the first time in my life, I have real choices. I can go anywhere, do anything, be anyone I want to be. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. You know what? You're right. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself. Will you help me? I need someone to handle the logistics while I'm on the road. Someone to manage my mail, handle my finances, maybe even help me tell my story. Of course, what do you need? Linda spent the next 2 hours outlining her plan. She would start with the collector car show circuit, attending events and meeting other enthusiasts. She'd document her journey, sharing Robert's story and her own. She'd reach out to automotive journalists and bloggers, offering interviews and exclusive access to the Cobra's restoration story. Most importantly, she'd live her life on her own terms. That afternoon, she drove to Michael's house in the Honda to collect a few items she'd forgotten. She used her key to enter through the front door, calling out to announce her presence. The house was quiet, Michael was at work, and Jennifer was out with friends. She was in the garage, collecting the last of her belongings, when she heard voices in the kitchen. Jennifer had returned with her sister and mother, apparently giving them a tour of the house before the weekend guests arrived. And this is where we're converting the spare room into Michael's office, Jennifer was saying. We finally convinced his mother to move out. She was really overstaying her welcome. Where did she go? Jennifer's sister asked. I don't know. And, honestly, I don't care. She packed up this morning and left without saying goodbye. I think she finally got the message. Linda's mother-in-law chimed in. Well, it's about time. I never understood why you let her stay so long. Michael's too soft-hearted for his own good. The important thing is that she's gone, Jennifer said. Now we can finally have our house back? Linda stood frozen in the garage, her hands clenched around the box she'd been carrying. These women were discussing her departure like she was a problem that had been solved, a stain that had been removed. The casual cruelty of their words cut deeper than any argument could have. She finished packing in silence and loaded the last box into the Honda. As she backed out of the driveway, she saw Jennifer and her guests through the kitchen window laughing and planning their weekend. None of them noticed her leaving that evening. Linda sat in her hotel room and composed a letter to Michael. She wrote draft after draft, struggling to find the right words. How do you tell your child that their indifference has broken your heart? How do you explain that love isn't enough when it's not accompanied by respect? In the end, she kept it simple. Dear Michael, I've left your house and won't be returning. I know you believe I was overstaying my welcome, and you're probably right. I was trying to hold on to something that no longer exists. The family we used to be. I want you to know that I love you and I always will. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. But I also love myself, and I've realized that I can't sacrifice my dignity to maintain a relationship that causes us both discomfort. Your father left me well provided for, so you don't need to worry about my finances. I'll be traveling while seeing parts of the country I've never seen, doing things I've never done. I hope you'll understand that this isn't about anger or resentment. It's about choosing to live the rest of my life with purpose and joy. I hope someday we can have a relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Until then, I'll be thinking of you and hoping you find the happiness you deserve. Love, always. MOMPS. I've left a key to the storage unit on your kitchen counter. There are some of your father's tools and equipment there that you might want to keep. Please wait at least 6 months before going through anything. There are some things I need to handle first. She mailed the letter that night, then spent the next day making final preparations. She transferred most of her savings to a new account, arranged for her mail to be forwarded to Margaret's address, and had a long conversation with Robert's lawyer about the estate. The lawyer, James Morrison, was a family friend who'd known Robert for 30 years. He listened to Linda's plans with a mixture of admiration and concern. Linda, I think what you're doing is brave and probably necessary. But I have to ask, Carr, you sure you're ready for the attention this car is going to bring? A woman your age driving $1 million sports car is going to attract notice. That's what I'm hoping for. James, I spent 40 years being invisible. I'd like to see what it feels like to be seen. And Michael, have you considered how this might affect your relationship with him? Linda was quiet for a moment. Michael made it clear that he's ready for me to be out of his life. I'm simply granting his wish in a way he didn't expect. The third morning, Linda checked out of the hotel and drove to the storage facility. She'd researched the route to her first destination, a classic car show in Scottsdale, Arizona, where she'd arranged to meet with a collector car journalist who'd expressed interest in Robert's restoration story. She transferred her belongings to the Cobra's small trunk, amazed at how little space her new life required. The car's interior was cramped compared to modern vehicles, but it felt intimate rather than confining. Every surface was purposeful, every control within easy reach. This was a machine built for driving, not for carrying passengers or cargo. The engine started with its familiar thunder, and Linda felt her heart rate spike with excitement and terror. She was about to drive a multi-million-dollar race car on public roads. something she'd never imagined doing even in her wildest dreams. She pulled out of the storage facility and onto the street, feeling the car's power even at city speeds. The Cobra was more responsive than anything she'd ever driven, every input amplified, every sensation magnified. The steering wheel transmitted every nuance of the road surface. The engine responded to her foot like a living thing, and the sound was intoxicating by the time she reached the interstate. Linda was beginning to understand what Robert had experienced during his secret restoration sessions. This wasn't just about having a valuable carrot, it was about having a direct connection to the golden age of American automotive engineering. A piece of history that responded to her every command. She'd planned to drive conservatively, staying in the right lane and maintaining moderate speeds, but the Cobra had other ideas. It seemed to pull her into the left lane to encourage her to match the rhythm of its engine to the rhythm of the highway. Within an hour, she was cruising at speeds that would have terrified her in any other car but felt natural and controlled in the Cobra. She stopped for gas in Colorado Springs, and the reaction was immediate. A crowd gathered around the car before she'd even finished filling the tank. Men and women of all ages wanted to know about the car's history, its specifications, Several people asked if they could take pictures, and Linda found herself telling Robert's story to strangers who listened with genuine interest and respect. An elderly man approached as she was preparing to leave. "Ma'am, I haven't seen a real 427 Cobra in probably 20 years. Your husband did beautiful work on this restoration. Thank you. He would have been proud to hear that. Is he... He passed away 6 months ago. I'm driving the car to honor his memory." The man's expression softened. Well, he chose the right person to carry on his legacy. Drive it like he would have wanted, with joy and pride. Linda felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you. That means more than you know." As she pulled back onto the interstate, Linda realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in months, strangers had looked at her with admiration rather than pity, with interest rather than dismissal. They'd seen her not as someone's burden or obligation, but as the keeper of an incredible story and the driver of an extraordinary machine. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it during her next stop and saw it was from Michael. "Mom, got your letter. We need to talk. Please call me." Linda stared at the message for a long moment, then put the phone away without responding. She had 800 miles of open road ahead of her, a story to tell and a life to reclaim. The conversation with Michael could wait until she was ready to have it on her own terms. The afternoon sun was beginning to set behind her as she crossed into New Mexico, the Cobra's engine purring with contentment at highway speeds. In the rearview mirror, she could see the mountains of Colorado fading into the distance. Ahead lay the desert, the car show in Scottsdale, and whatever came after that. For the first time in months, Linda Martinez was driving towards something, instead of running away from it, and the feeling was absolutely intoxicating. 3 weeks later, Linda stood in the VIP tent at the Barrett-Jackson collector car auction in Scottsdale, sipping champagne and watching grown men bid millions of dollars on automotive works of art. The Cobra was parked just outside the tent, drawing crowds and conversations wherever she took it. What had started as a simple trip to a car show had evolved into something she'd never anticipated: media sensation. The transformation had begun with her first interview. Jake Morrison, a journalist for Classic Car Weekly, had met her at the Scottsdale show as planned. What was supposed to be a 15-minute conversation about Robert's restoration had turned into a 2-hour session that covered everything from her marriage to her recent departure from Michael's house. "So let me get this straight," Jake had said, his recorder running and his photographer snapping pictures of Linda beside the Cobra. "Your husband spent 20 years secretly restoring this car, left it to you with a letter, and you discovered it the same week your son asked you to sleep in his garage?" "That's correct," Linda had replied, her voice steady and clear. "And instead of selling the car, you decided to drive it across the country." Robert wrote that it was the sound of freedom. I needed to understand what he meant. The article, titled "The Widow and the Cobra: A Love Story in 427 Cubic Inches," had been picked up by automotive blogs, shared on social media, and eventually featured on several major news websites. The story resonated with readers who saw Linda not just as a car owner, but as a woman who'd reclaimed her independence in the most dramatic way possible. The media attention had been overwhelming at first. Linda's phone rang constantly with interview requests. Her social media followers had grown from 0 to 50,000 in 2 weeks, and she'd been invited to appear on 3 morning talk shows. Magazine photographers had shot her with the Cobra in desert landscapes, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, her smile genuine and confident. But it was the personal responses that touched her most deeply. Women wrote to tell her about their own experiences with ungrateful children, about marriages that had defined them so completely that widowhood left them lost and invisible. Men shared stories about restoration projects, about dreams deferred and passions hidden. Young people wrote about the importance of following your dreams regardless of age or circumstances. "You're becoming the poster child for late life independence," Jake had told her during their follow-up interview. "Do you realize how many people you're inspiring?" Linda hadn't realized, not fully until she started receiving letters at the hotel addresses where she was staying, hundreds of letters from people who'd seen her story and felt compelled to share their own. Some were heartbreaking stories of loneliness, abandonment, and dreams given up for other people's comfort. Others were inspiring tales of people who'd found the courage to make dramatic changes in their own lives after reading about hers. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a 70-year-old woman in Michigan whose children had been pressuring her to sell her house and move to assisted living so they could access her savings and let her children figure out their own financial problems. "You showed me that being a good mother doesn't mean sacrificing everything for ungrateful children," the woman had written. "Thank you for giving me permission to live my own life." Now, standing in the Barrett-Jackson tent with automotive royalty and serious collectors, Linda reflected on how much her life had changed. She was wearing a designer dress purchased for her television appearances. Her hair had been professionally styled by a salon in Phoenix, and she was discussing carburetor modifications with men who owned car collections worth tens of millions of dollars. "Linda, there you are." Craig Jackson himself, the chairman of Barrett-Jackson, approached with a smile, and two other men she recognized from automotive television shows. "I wanted you to meet Tom Cotter and Dennis Gage. They're interested in featuring your story in their shows." Linda shook hands with the men, still amazed that people she'd watched on television now wanted to interview her. Tom Cotter hosted a show about barn finds and hidden automotive treasures. Dennis Gage was the longtime host of My Classic Car, a program she and Robert had watched religiously on Saturday mornings. "Mrs. Martinez," Dennis said, his voice carrying the same warmth she'd heard on television. "Your story is exactly the kind of thing our viewers love. A 20-year secret restoration, a widow discovering her independence, and one of the most beautiful cobras I've ever seen. Would you be interested in being featured on the show?" "I'd be honored," Linda replied. "But I have to ask, is this really television-worthy? I'm just a woman driving her late husband's car." Tom Cotter laughed. "Just a woman driving her late husband's car." "Linda, you've captured the imagination of the entire automotive world. Your Instagram posts get more engagement than most professional automotive journalists. You've shown up to car shows in a multi-million-dollar Cobra and charmed everyone you've met. And your story, the secret restoration, the family drama, the journey of self-discovery, it's better than anything Hollywood could write." Linda looked through the tents opening at the Cobra, gleaming under the Arizona sun. A small crowd had gathered around it, as happened everywhere she parked. She'd grown accustomed to the attention, but she still marveled at the car's magnetic effect on people. "The truth is," Dennis continued, "you've become something of a celebrity in the car world. Barrett-Jackson wants to feature the Cobra in their next television special. Haggerty Insurance is interested in sponsoring your travels. And I heard from Jake Morrison that there's been interest from a major television network about a documentary." A documentary? Linda tried to process the idea of her life being the subject of a television documentary. 6 months ago, she'd been sleeping on a cot in Michael's garage. Now, people wanted to film her story for national television. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and saw it was from Michael again. "Mom, I've been watching the news coverage. We really need to talk. I had no idea about Dad's car or about your ... situation. Please call me." Linda had received similar messages from Michael over the past 3 weeks. Each one was slightly more desperate than the last, and she suspected his concern had less to do with paternal love and more to do with the fact that his mother had become a media sensation driving a car worth more than his house. She excused herself from the conversation and stepped outside the tent to call Margaret, who had become her unofficial manager and closest confidant. "Barrett-Jackson wants to feature the car in a television special, and there's interest in a documentary." "Linda, that's incredible. But how are you feeling about all this attention?" "It's a lot to process." Linda looked around at the auction activities, the crowds of enthusiasts examining million-dollar cars, the photographers and journalists documenting every detail. Now she felt energized by it. "I feel alive," she said simply. "For the first time in years, I feel like I matter, not as someone's wife or someone's mother, but as myself. And Michael, he's been calling me too, asking for your hotel information. He seems pretty desperate to talk to you." Linda was quiet for a moment. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should talk to him when you're ready, not when he's ready. You've spent your whole life accommodating his schedule and his needs. Maybe it's time for him to accommodate yours. That evening, Linda attended the collector car auction as a VIP guest. She watched as automotive treasures sold for astronomical prices, each car representing someone's dream, someone's passion, someone's story. When a 1967 Shelby Cobra 427, similar to hers, sold for $2.8 million, the crowd turned to look at her, recognizing her as the woman with the famous story and the equally famous car. After the auction, she was approached by a producer from a major cable network who explained the documentary concept. They wanted to follow her journey for 6 months, filming her interactions with the car community, her travels across the country, and her personal story of transformation. We're calling it The Cobra's Widow, the producer explained. It's about more than just a cur, it's about reinvention, about finding your voice later in life, about the power of inheritance to change everything. Linda listened to the pitch with amazement. The woman describing her life made it sound epic, cinematic, worthy of national attention. But more than that, the producer understood that the story wasn't really about the currit, was about the choice. To live authentically, regardless of age or circumstances, there is one thing, the producer continued. His perspective. Linda's stomach tightened. Including Michael in the documentary would mean confronting their relationship publicly, in front of cameras and eventually in front of millions of viewers. I'll need to think about that, she said, and I'll need to talk to Michael first. That night, in her suite at the Four Seasons, Scottsdale, Linda finally returned Michael's calls. He answered on the first ring. Have you, Michael? Because 3 weeks ago you didn't seem particularly concerned about my welfare. There was a long pause. Mom, I know I screwed up. I know I treated you badly, but I had no idea about Dad's car, about your financial situation, about any of this. The car doesn't change what happened, Michael. I was your mother whether I was rich or poor. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I'm ashamed of how I acted. Jennifer's ashamed too. We both are. Linda doubted Jennifer's shame was genuine, but she let it pass. What do you want, Michael? I want to apologize. I want to make things right. I want my mother back. The one who slept in your garage? Or the one driving the multi-million-dollar car? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Linda could hear Michael breathing, could almost feel him struggling with the honesty the question demanded. I want my mother back, he said finally. The one who raised me, who loved me unconditionally, who deserved better than what I gave her. It was the first acknowledgement of his behavior that didn't include excuses or justifications. Linda felt some of the anger she'd been carrying begin to soften. Michael, I'm willing to have a relationship with you, but it has to be different. I'm not the same woman who left your house 3 weeks ago. I've discovered things about myself, about what I'm capable of, about what I deserve. I can't go back to being invisible. I don't want you to be invisible. Mom, I want you to be exactly who you are right now. Strong, independent, amazing. I've been watching the interviews, reading the articles. I'm proud of you. Are you proud of me? Or are you proud of the car? Another long pause. I'm proud of you for having the courage to leave when I made it clear you weren't welcome. I'm proud of you for taking Dad's gift and turning it into something incredible. And I'm ashamed that it took seeing you on television for me to realize what I'd lost. Linda felt tears begin to form. This was the conversation she'd been hoping for, but hadn't dared to expect. There's something else, she said. A television network wants to do a documentary about my story. They want to include you, to show the family dynamic that led to my leaving. You mean they want to show what an ungrateful son I was? They want to show the truth? Michael, all of it? The good, the bad, and the ugly? Michael was quiet for a long time. Would it help people? Other families going through similar situations? Linda was surprised by the question. She'd expected him to be concerned about his reputation, his career, his public image. Instead, he was asking about helping others. I think it might. I've gotten hundreds of letters from people dealing with similar family issues. Maybe seeing our story, the whole story, could help them find better solutions. Then I'll do it. If it means we can rebuild our relationship and maybe help other people avoid our mistakes, I'll do it. Linda felt a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying begin to lift. Michael, there's something I need you to understand. I'm not coming home. I'm not going back to being the dependent widow living in her son's house. This is my life now, traveling, meeting people, sharing Robert's story and mine. If we're going to have a relationship, it's going to be between equals. I understand. And Mom, I love you. I've always loved you. I just forgot how to show it properly. I love you too, sweetheart. I always have and I always will. After they hung up, Linda sat in her hotel suite and looked out at the Scottsdale skyline. 3 weeks ago, she'd been sleeping in a garage, treated like an unwelcome burden by the son she'd devoted her life to raising. Tonight, she was fielding offers for television appearances, documentary features, and sponsorship deals. But more importantly, she was no longer invisible. She was Linda Martinez, not just Michael's mother or Robert's widow, but a woman with her own story, her own dreams, her own magnificent machine that carried her toward whatever adventure came next. The documentary crew would start filming next week. Following her 2 car shows across the country, Michael would fly out to meet her in 2 weeks for their first on-camera conversation since her departure. Margaret had booked her for 3 more magazine interviews and a podcast appearance. Linda walked out onto the hotel balcony and could see the Cobra in the parking area below, its blue paint gleaming under the security lights. Tomorrow, she would drive it to a car show in California, where hundreds of people would want to hear Robert's story and her own. The day after that, there would be another destination, another audience, another opportunity to show the world that reinvention was possible at any age. She thought about Robert's letter, about his words regarding the sound of freedom and the sound of possibilities. He'd been right about both. But what he couldn't have anticipated was that the car would give her more than freedom and possibilities. It had given her a voice. And Linda Martinez finally had something to say. Epilogue. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Linda's new home, a beautiful ranch house in Sedona, Arizona, with a 3-car garage that housed the Cobra alongside her practical daily driver and the vintage motorcycle she'd recently learned to ride. At 63, Linda Martinez had discovered that life's greatest adventures often begin when you think they're supposed to be ending. The documentary, The Cobra's Widow, had premiered the previous month to critical acclaim and impressive ratings. The film followed Linda's journey from sleeping in Michael's garage to becoming one of the most recognizable figures in the collector car world. But more than that, it told the story of a woman who refused to accept invisibility, who chose dignity over convenience, and who discovered that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. The most powerful moment in the documentary had been Linda's reunion with Michael at the Pebble Beach Concord deck. Their conversation, filmed against the backdrop of the Pacific Ocean and some of the world's most beautiful cars, was raw, honest, and ultimately redemptive. Michael's acknowledgement of his failures as a son, his understanding of what he'd lost, and his commitment to rebuilding their relationship had moved audiences to tears. "I thought I was doing her a favor by letting her stay with us," Michael had said to the camera. "I never realized that she was doing me the favor by trying to maintain a relationship with a son who'd forgotten how to love his mother properly." The documentary had sparked a national conversation about elder care, family relationships, and the way society often renders older women invisible. Linda had appeared on morning talk shows, been featured in major magazines, and received thousands of letters from viewers who saw their own stories reflected in hers. But perhaps more importantly, the film had led to real change in people's lives. Support groups had formed for older adults dealing with difficult family situations. Adult children had reached out to estranged parents. Families had begun having conversations about respect, dignity, and the true meaning of care. Linda's phone rang, interrupting her morning coffee and her review of the day's schedule. It was Michael, calling for their now weekly check-in. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling about tonight's event?" Tonight was the premiere of Linda's new television show, Roads Less Traveled, where she would drive classic cars to hidden destinations across America, sharing the stories behind the machines and the people who restored them. It was a natural evolution of her unexpected fame, and she was both excited and nervous about this new chapter. "I'm ready," she said. "Nervous but ready." "Are you and the kids going to watch?" "Are you kidding? We're having a premiere party?" Megan made a banner that says, "My grandma is famous. She's telling everyone at school that her grandmother is on television." Linda smiled. Her relationship with her granddaughter had deepened tremendously over the past 6 months. Megan was fascinated by her grandmother's transformation and had asked if she could learn to drive the Cobra when she turned 16. Linda had promised to teach her, assuming the car would still be in the family by then. And Jennifer? How is she adjusting? "To having a famous mother-in-law," Michael laughed. "She's actually been great about it. I think seeing how badly she treated you and how wrong she was about who you are was a wake-up call. She's been volunteering at a senior center, helping elderly women with technology and social media. She says it's her way of making amends." Linda was genuinely surprised by this development. Jennifer's transformation had been almost as dramatic as her own, though in the opposite direction, from self-centered to service-oriented. "And you? How are you doing with all of this?" "I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but more than that, I'm proud of who you've become. Or maybe who you always were, and I was just too selfish to see it." After they hung up, Linda walked out to the garage and looked at the Cobra. In 6 months, she'd put over 15,000 miles on the car, driving it to car shows, filming locations, and adventures across the American West. The odometer that had read 12 miles when she'd first discovered the car now showed over 15,000. Robert would have been amazed to see his meticulously restored machine being driven and enjoyed exactly as he'd intended. She'd kept every letter Robert had written during the restoration, and she'd found more surprises in the storage unit photographs of the car in various stages of completion, receipts showing the incredible attention to detail he'd invested, and notes about his plans for surprising her with the finished car. The network had used some of these materials in the documentary, showing the love story behind the restoration. But the biggest surprise had come just last month, when Linda had been going through Robert's desk and found a sealed envelope marked Linda's Next Adventure. Inside was information about a small airport hangar he'd rented, containing something he called Project Number 2. The hangar had contained a partially restored 1969 Dodge Charger RT, complete with detailed restoration, notes, and a letter explaining that he'd bought it as a follow-up project to the Cobra. If you're reading this, the letter had said, "It means you've discovered the Cobra and decided to embrace the adventures I hoped it would bring. This Charger is for your next chapter, a car you can restore yourself, with the skills I've been secretly teaching you through all those years of helping me in the garage." Linda had realized that Robert's weekend projects hadn't been just household repairs. He'd been teaching her automotive skills, preparing her for exactly this situation. The knowledge was all there, buried in years of casual instruction disguised as domestic maintenance. She'd decided to tackle the Charger restoration as the subject of her television show's second season, if there was one. The idea of a widow learning to restore a muscle car herself had already generated interest from producers and sponsors. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Watched the preview clip for tonight's show. You look like a movie star behind it. The wheel of that Mustang? Who would have thought my little sister would become a television personality?" Linda smiled and typed back, "Who would have thought your little sister would learn to drive a race car at 62? As she prepared for the day-ahead interviews with automotive journalists, a photo shoot for a classic car magazine, and the evening premiere party, Linda reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she'd been invisible, unwanted, sleeping in a garage. Today, she was the host of her own television show, a spokesperson for several automotive brands, and a voice for older women who refuse to accept society's expectations about aging gracefully and quietly. The transformation hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, times when the attention felt overwhelming, and days when she'd missed the simplicity of her old life. But there had also been moments of pure joy, the first time she'd pushed the Cobra to its limits on a closed racetrack, the standing ovation she'd received at the Women's Automotive Hall of Fame, the letters from viewers who'd been inspired to pursue their own delayed dreams. Most importantly, there had been the gradual rebuilding of her relationship with Michael. Their weekly phone calls had evolved into monthly visits, and she was planning to spend Christmas with his family for the first time since Robert's death. But this time she would be coming as an honored guest, not a burdensome obligation. As Linda backed the Cobra out of her garage and headed toward her first interview of the day, she thought about Robert's words about the sound of freedom and possibilities. He'd given her both. But what he couldn't have anticipated was that she would use them to create something entirely new, a life that was authentically her own, lived on her own terms, with adventures he could never have imagined. The Cobra roared to life, its engine singing the song of American automotive excellence. Linda smiled, shifted into first gear, and drove toward whatever extraordinary thing would happen next. At 63, she was just getting started.